metallic tang of fear, it's still on my tongue. A phantom taste, a lingering echo of rust and something else. My hands are shaking, even now, hours later, maybe days. Time loses its meaning when you're down there, in the hollowed-out belly of the city. The air, it clings to you, thick with the scent of damp earth, stagnant water, and a cold, ancient quiet that screams of things best left undisturbed. I can still hear the echoes, the whispers that weren't whispers, the scratching that wasn't rats. I saw things, felt things, and I swear to God I can't unsee them. I wish I'd never gone looking for it, that hidden subway station, the one they all said was just an urban myth, a forgotten architectural folly. But it's real, and something else is real, too. Something that's been festering beneath our feet for decades, maybe centuries. And I, like an absolute fool, pulled back the lid. I've always been drawn to the forgotten corners of our city. Not the grand, historic landmarks everyone flocks to, but the shadowed alleyways, the abandoned buildings, the forgotten tunnels beneath the concrete. My name's Alex, and I'm one of those people who find beauty in decay. A silent history in the crumbling bricks and rust-stained steel. Our city, old and sprawling, has always felt like a living organism to me, one with secrets pressed deep into its very foundations. You know the type. A city built layer upon layer, each generation adding its own history, often paving over or simply forgetting what came before. That's where my obsession began. It started innocently enough, just a casual browse through an obscure local history forum. Someone posted a grainy, sepia-toned photograph, a group of stoic-looking men in turn-of-the-century attire standing in front of a massive, arched tunnel entrance. The caption was cryptic, something about the lost line, abandoned before completion. Intrigued, I started digging. My city has a well-documented subway system, an intricate web of lines that's been expanded and upgraded for over 100 years. But this tunnel in the photo wasn't on any modern map. It didn't look like any of the existing stations. The architecture felt heavier, more imposing, almost brutalist in its forgotten grandeur. The forum thread was a rabbit hole of speculation and half-baked theories. Most dismissed it as a photoshopped image, an elaborate hoax, or a misidentified entrance to a forgotten sewer system. But a few, a very dedicated few, spoke of whispers. Old-timers who'd mentioned stories of a ghost line, a failed venture from the early 20th century, quietly shut down and sealed off, its very existence erased from official records due to some unspecified catastrophic incident. The more I read, the more a chill prickled my skin. Why go to such lengths to erase something? A failed subway project is hardly a state secret, unless the failure wasn't just financial. My research became an obsession. I scoured the city archives, poring over dusty blueprints, ancient newspaper clippings, and even obscure urban planning documents from the 1920s and 30s. Most of it was useless, dead ends that confirmed the official narrative. But then, in a brittle, yellowed municipal report detailing an early 20th century public works budget, I found it. A tiny, almost imperceptible line item for subterranean expansion project, Line D, abandoned. The location coordinates were vague, referencing old city wards that no longer existed, but they pointed to a general area. Deep beneath what is now the industrial district, a sprawling wasteland of crumbling factories and forgotten warehouses. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A faint flicker of official acknowledgement. It proved the lost line wasn't entirely a myth, but still, no maps, no designs, no mention of why it was abandoned. The silence surrounding it was deafening. It was like the city itself was actively trying to forget it. And that, of course, only fueled my determination. What could be so terrible that an entire multi-million-dollar public works project was not only scrapped, but wiped from the collective memory? I started exploring the industrial district. Weeks of trudging through overgrown lots, past chain-link fences choked with kudzu, around derelict buildings with shattered windows that stared out like vacant eyes. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp concrete and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. Every rusted access panel, every sealed-off tunnel entrance became a potential lead. I checked old storm drains, forgotten utility conduits, anything that might lead deeper into the earth. It was exhausting, frustrating work, often feeling like a fool's errand, but there was a strange pull, a gut feeling that I was getting closer, a subtle hum in the ground, a faint vibration that wasn't from any active subway line, just a persistent, low thrum beneath my feet, like a sleeping giant. Then, one evening, after another fruitless day of scrambling through a particularly desolate stretch of abandoned factories, I spotted it. Tucked away behind a collapsed loading dock, half buried under decades of rubble and overgrown with thorny vines, was a maintenance access hatch. It was old, much older than the surrounding structures made of thick, riveted steel, the kind they don't make anymore. No modern safety warnings, no danger, high voltage signs, just rust, grime, and a padlock so ancient it had practically fused with the metal. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't an ordinary utility access. This felt different, forbidden. I spent the next few days gathering supplies, bolt cutters, a high-powered flashlight, a gas mask, just in case, a first aid kit, and enough water and snacks for a long expedition. The night I finally returned, the moon was a thin crescent, barely piercing the gloom. The old factories stood silhouetted against the bruised purple sky, hulking shadows watching me. The air was still, oppressive, charged with an almost palpable sense of anticipation, or dread. The bolt cutters groaned and shrieked as I worked them, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the dead silence. With a final, sickening crack, the ancient padlock gave way. I pulled open the heavy hatch. A gasp escaped my lips, stolen by the stagnant air that rushed out from below. It wasn't the fresh, earthy smell I expected, but something foul and cloying, like sulfur and decay, mixed with the faint, unsettling sweetness I'd noticed before. It was an odor that clawed at the back of my throat, instantly making my stomach churn. Below, a narrow, rusty ladder descended into absolute darkness. My flashlight beam cut through the black, revealing nothing but more darkness, a deeper, endless abyss. The first step onto the cold metal rung sent a shiver through me. This wasn't just a hole in the ground, it felt like a gaping wound in the city's underbelly. And I, Alex, with my insatiable curiosity and reckless disregard for self-preservation, was about to step right inside. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to seal the hatch and pretend I'd never found it. But the lure of the unknown, the thrill of finally uncovering the city's deepest secret, was too powerful. I took a deep breath, the foul air filling my lungs, and began my descent. The scraping of my boots on the ladder, the only sound, seemed to reverberate infinitely into the oppressive void below. The ladder felt impossibly long, cold metal biting into my gloved hands, each rung a tiny victory against the encroaching darkness. My flashlight beam, once a confident spear of light, now seemed swallowed whole by the oppressive black, its edges frayed and weak. The air grew heavier with every foot I descended, the putrid smell intensifying, becoming a physical presence in my throat. It wasn't just decay. There was an underlying metallic sweetness, like burnt sugar mixed with old blood, making my stomach clench. A low, persistent hum, the one I'd felt subtly above ground, now resonated through the ladder itself, vibrating up my arms, a deep, resonant thrum that felt more alive than mechanical. It felt ancient, like the earth itself was murmuring a warning. My breath hitched. I had to consciously force myself to breathe slowly, deeply, to calm the frantic thumping in my chest. Claustrophobia, a familiar companion in these tight spaces, began to press in. The walls of the shaft were rough-hewn stone in some sections, crumbling concrete in others, slick with a glistening, dark moisture. Water droplets plopped irregularly somewhere below, echoing eerily. My mind, usually sharp and analytical, found itself conjuring images of things slithering in the dark, things waiting at the bottom. Stupid, I told myself. Just an abandoned shaft, just a forgotten tunnel. But the rationalizations felt flimsy, like a thin sheet of paper against a hurricane. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my boots hit something solid. Not rock, but a flat, hard surface. I swung my leg off the ladder, landing on a narrow concrete ledge. My flashlight swept around, cutting through the thick, inky blackness. I stood in a short, low-ceilinged passage, barely wide enough for me to stand upright without my head scraping the uneven concrete above. The air here was even worse, colder, denser, carrying an additional hint of ozone, like after a lightning strike, but stale and old. The hum was louder, a deep, pervasive vibration that resonated in my bones, making my teeth ache. The passage opened into a larger tunnel, a cavernous maw stretching into the gloom. This was it. This was undeniably a subway tunnel, but unlike any I'd ever seen. The curvature was different. The walls, lined with a dark, almost black brick, interspersed with sections of exposed, weeping rock. There were no tracks, just a wide, uneven dirt floor, strewn with chunks of fallen masonry, rusty rebar, and what looked like skeletal remains of old wooden planks, long rotted into unrecognizable shapes. The scale of it was immense, far grander than any modern subway line, yet it felt compressed, heavy, as if the weight of the earth above was constantly pushing down. I took a few cautious steps forward, my boots crunching on loose gravel. My flashlight beam danced ahead, revealing a chilling detail. The walls weren't just dark, they were stained. A persistent, reddish-brown discoloration streaked down the brickwork in countless places, like ancient, dried blood that had wept from the very stone. It wasn't just water seepage, it had an organic, arterial pattern to it. A sickening suspicion coiled in my gut. What kind of incident leaves stains like this? As I ventured deeper, the tunnel began to reveal more of its grotesque history. The air grew stiller, the distant plop of water fading, replaced by a new, more unsettling symphony of sounds. A faint, high-pitched skittering in the unseen corners of the tunnel, just beyond the reach of my light, and a low, guttural drip, drip, drip that seemed to originate from the very walls, not just the ceiling. Every few feet, I passed niches carved into the rock, meant for maintenance workers, but these were different. They were unnaturally deep, almost like small alcoves, and within their shadows I thought I saw movement, fleeting blurs that vanished as my light hit them. Rats? Or something larger? My heart rate spiked, a drum solo against my ribs. The walls started to change too. Beyond the reddish stains, I began to notice carvings, Not graffiti, but deliberate, intricate symbols etched directly into the dark brick and rock. They weren't human in origin. No sharp angles, no discernible language, just swirling, organic patterns that seemed to shift and writhe under the beam of my light, like living things. They reminded me of root systems, or complex neural networks, but disturbingly alien, almost predatory in their design. Some of these patterns appeared to have been scraped away, clumsily, as if someone had tried to erase them, leaving behind raw, scarred rock. But the patterns persisted, deeper than the crude attempts to eradicate them. It was unsettling, deeply, profoundly unsettling. An open loop, my mind screamed. These symbols, what were they? Who carved them? And why were people trying to remove them? This wasn't just a forgotten subway. This was a place with a history they actively tried to bury. I found the first abandoned piece of equipment then, a rusted, skeletal frame of what might have been a small construction cart, lying on its side, half submerged in a pool of stagnant, iridescent water. The water shimmered with an unnatural, oily sheen, reflecting the eerie symbols on the walls like distorted eyes. As I moved my light closer, I saw that the water wasn't just stagnant. It was choked with some kind of pale, fibrous growth, resembling fungal strands, but too thick, too uniform, too organized to be simple mold. It pulsed faintly, a barely perceptible rhythm that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I hesitated, wanting to turn back, to rationalize this as just an old, strange tunnel. But the momentum of my obsession, the sheer effort of getting this far, pushed me on. The station, I had to find the station. That was the prize. That was the proof. I told myself that once I saw it, I'd turn around. That was the plan. A flimsy promise I knew, even then, I would likely break. The tunnel began to slope downwards, a subtle but continuous decline, as if leading me deeper into the earth's maw. The hum intensified, a low drone that began to fill my ears, muffling other sounds, making my own footsteps feel strangely muted. The air, already thick with that cloying stench, grew noticeably colder, a bone-deep chill that seeped through my jacket. I noticed a subtle alteration in the visual field, too. A slight shimmer in the air ahead, like heat haze, but in a place utterly devoid of warmth. It made the distant darkness waver, seeming to breathe. Then, a sound. Not the skittering, not the dripping. Something new. A low, rhythmic thump, 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 thump. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A deep bass note beneath the constant hum. It felt resonant, like something heavy striking a hollow surface, far, far away. My stomach lurched. Was it the city above? Construction? No, the hum was too deep, too isolated from surface noise. This was from within the tunnel. It felt deliberate. My mind raced, desperately trying to assign a mundane explanation. A failing pump? Some deep geological phenomenon? But the rhythm felt too consistent, too intentional. I stopped, clicked off my flashlight, plunging myself into absolute darkness. The sudden void was terrifying, suffocating, but it allowed my ears to strain, to truly listen. Thump, 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 thump. It continued, faint but undeniable, and it seemed to be coming from ahead. I clicked the flashlight back on, its beam a meager comfort against the overwhelming black. My heart hammered, a frantic percussion accompanying the distant thumps. I was terrified, yes, but also filled with a perverse, desperate curiosity. What was making that sound, and how far away was it? My fear warred with my fascination, and for now, the fascination, the burning need to know, was winning. As I pressed onward, the tunnel grew wider, the ceiling higher, giving way to a more cavernous space. The darkness ahead was no longer a solid wall, but seemed to stretch into an impossible void. And then, through the shimmering haze, I saw it. The silhouette of a massive structure looming out of the gloom. It wasn't just a tunnel, it was a station. It was colossal, far larger than I had anticipated, an enormous archway of blackened stone and rusted iron. The platforms, if they were platforms, were swallowed by shadow, but I could make out the outlines of what looked like multiple tracks lost in the earth. The entire structure seemed to be a monument to an impossible scale, like a forgotten cathedral carved from the earth itself. It was the stuff of nightmares and forgotten empires. But it was what was on the structure that made me freeze, my breath catching in my throat. The entire face of the station, from the archway to the supporting pillars, was covered in those swirling alien symbols. They were carved deeply, not just etched into the stone, glowing with a faint, unearthly phosphorescence, a sickly, pulsing green light that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the distant thumps. They pulsed, almost imperceptibly, with a soft, internal luminescence, casting flickering shadows that danced like phantom figures across the crumbling stone. It wasn't just ornamentation. It looked like a vast, incomprehensible script, an ancient, alien language written by something with an intelligence utterly beyond human comprehension. And then, as my light swept across the glowing symbols, I saw them. Embedded within the pulsing patterns, fused with the very stone, were shapes. Indistinct at first, but as my eyes adjusted, a profound and horrifying realization dawned on me. They were faces. Distorted, elongated, screaming faces, mouths agape in silent agony, eyes wide with terror, pressed into the rock like fossilized nightmares. Not carvings of faces, but actual faces, preserved in a state of eternal horror, their features stretched and warped, part of the living, breathing rock itself. Petard faces, a gruesome mosaic of human suffering, all caught in the throes of an unimaginable final moment. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me, a sickening deluge that stole my breath and rooted me to the spot. My hands started to tremble uncontrollably, the flashlight beam shaking wildly, making the horrifying tableau dance and writhe. This wasn't just a forgotten station. This was a tomb, a monument to something unspeakable, and the low, rhythmic thump, 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 thump was louder now, closer, resonating not just in the walls but deep within my own chest, a monstrous heartbeat echoing through the abyssal gloom. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that I was not alone. The air in the cavernous station was thick with an unholy silence, broken only by the frantic drumming of my own heart and that abominable thump, 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 thump from the depths. The petrified faces, frozen in their eternal scream, seemed to watch me with hollow eyes, their agony radiating outwards like a palpable force. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, trying to shoehorn it into some semblance of rationality. Geological anomaly? A morbid art project? But the sheer scale of the horror, the organic integration of flesh into stone, defied any logical explanation. This wasn't natural. This wasn't human. My knees felt weak, threatening to buckle beneath me. Every primal instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this grotesque monument. But I was frozen, trapped by a terrifying fascination, unable to tear my eyes away from the grotesque spectacle. The glowing, alien symbols pulsed with a sickening rhythm, and within their shifting light, the faces seemed to contort further, their silent screams echoing in the hollow chambers of my mind, The air tasted like fear, hot and metallic, filling my lungs with a heavy dread. And then the thump, 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 thump intensified, no longer distant but distinctly closer, resonating up through the dirt floor, through my boots, through my very bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical impact, a heavy, deliberate movement. Something enormous was approaching, moving through the utter blackness beyond the station platforms. The ground vibrated, a low rumble accompanying the thumps, shaking loose dust and pebbles from the high ceiling, which rained down in tiny, unsettling showers around me. I tore my gaze from the petrified faces, my flashlight beam wildly cutting through the abyssal space ahead. My hand, slick with nervous sweat, clutched the cold metal of the flashlight, my knuckles white. There was nothing to hide behind, nowhere to run. The entrance to the tunnel, the only way out, seemed miles away, swallowed by the darkness. Panic, cold and sharp, began to truly set in. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness, not a solid form at first, but a distortion in the air, a place where the black was blacker, deeper, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. It was immense, unthinkably large. My breath caught in my throat, a choked sob. My rational mind, fighting a losing battle, tried to tell me it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my overwrought imagination. But my body knew better. My instincts shrieked of an apex predator, of something ancient and utterly alien. The thumps grew deafening, echoing through the vast space, vibrating through the very earth. The air crackled with a strange static energy, and the phosphorescent symbols on the station walls flared brighter, pulsing with an increased urgency, as if reacting to the proximity of this thing. The petrified faces seemed to glow with a ghastly internal light, their frozen torment illuminated anew, and then it emerged. From the deepest shadows it glided into view, an impossible shape in an impossible place. It wasn't organic in any way I understood. It was a colossal, chitinous construct, like an insect made of solid shadow and obsidian, but with a fluidity of movement that defied its immense size. Imagine a centipede, but one scaled up to the size of a subway train, its segments rippling with an unsettling, fluid grace. Its body was a series of dark, articulated plates, each one reflecting no light, simply absorbing it, creating a moving void. Along its flanks, countless limbs, slender and impossibly long, moved with a silent, scuttling precision, each ending in a sharp, chitinous point that dug into the earthen floor, making those rhythmic thumps. Its head, if it could be called a head, was a nightmare made manifest. A bulbous, segmented mass, devoid of discernible eyes or mouth, but with a series of pulsing, bioluminescent organs that glowed with the same sickly green as the symbols on the wall. These organs seemed to shift and change, mimicking the patterns of the alien script, contracting and expanding with a slow, deliberate rhythm. From this horrific head, a forest of thin whip-like tendrils writhed and snaked, testing the air, each one tipped with a razor-sharp barb. They twitched, probing, like 100 independent minds assessing the environment. I couldn't move. My legs were stone. My throat was clamped shut. My mind screamed, but no sound escaped. This wasn't just a forgotten subway station. This was its lair. This thing was what caused the incident. This was why the line was erased. And I, fool that I was, had stumbled right into its domain. The creature's tendrils, impossibly long, began to sweep the air, their movements deliberate, almost investigative. One of them, incredibly thin but impossibly strong, grazed a crumbling support pillar on the far side of the station. With a sickening crack, The ancient stone column pulverized, crumbling into dust and rubble as if it were made of chalk. The sound was deafening, echoing through the vast space, sending a new wave of terror through me. This thing wasn't just large, it was immensely powerful. Its segmented body turned slowly, deliberately, its glowing organs seeming to focus. I felt it, a pressure, a probing in my mind, not a voice, but a primal, instinctual awareness that it knew I was there. It wasn't looking with eyes. It was perceiving with something far more ancient and terrifying. The air grew colder, the oppressive silence returning, heavier than before, suffocating. The thumps ceased. The creature had stopped. It was listening, or sensing. One of the whip-like tendrils, thick as my arm, began to extend, slowly, deliberately, towards me. It snaked across the floor, bypassing obstacles with an eerie intelligence, its barbed tip aimed directly at my chest. It moved with a horrifying slowness, each inch of its progress a lifetime, an eternity of dread. I could hear the faint scrape of its barbs against the dirt, a sound that grated on my very soul. My body, finally, blessedly, unlocked. A surge of pure adrenaline coursed through me, a desperate, animalistic urge to survive. I didn't think. I reacted. I turned, scrambling blindly, my boots slipping on the loose gravel. I had to get out. I had to get back to the ladder, back to the light, back to sanity. I ran. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, making the alien symbols on the tunnel walls dance like mocking fiends. The putrid smell, the cold, the oppressive hum, it all fused into a cacophony of terror that drove me forward. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my lungs burning, my legs screaming, the distant, rhythmic thump-thump now chasing me, a terrifying metronome counting down my inevitable capture. The tunnel, which had felt impossibly long on the way in, now felt endless on the way out. Each step was a desperate prayer. The sounds of the creature, the heavy thumps, the scrapes of its tendrils grew louder, closer. It was gaining on me. I could feel the vibrations through the ground, feel the shift in the air pressure as its immense mass moved behind me. It was too fast, impossibly fast for something so enormous. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. In the erratic glow of my flashlight, I saw it. The creature was closer, much closer. Its pulsing, glowing head mass filled the tunnel, its tendrils whipping through the air like a storm of barbed wires. The air rippled around it, distorting the ancient brickwork, making the very walls seem to warp and stretch. And then I noticed something new, something that made my blood run cold. Embedded in the creature's chitinous plates, almost seamlessly integrated, were those same screaming faces. Not petrified into the stone, but into the creature itself. Hundreds, thousands of them pressed into its dark hide, their mouths open in silent, eternal torment. They were part of it, absorbed into its horrific form, their features contorted in a grotesque mosaic of human suffering. It was a living, moving tomb, a monster made of absorbed agony, and I was about to become one of them. A tendril shot out, incredibly fast, a blur of dark cotton and razor-sharp barb. It didn't aim for me, not directly. It struck the ground just inches to my left, gouging a deep furrow in the dirt, sending a shower of pebbles and dirt flying. The force of the impact made me stumble, my ankle twisting painfully. I cried out, a pathetic, strangled sound, but I didn't stop. The pain was just another fuel for my desperate flight. Another tendril. This one swept closer, catching the back of my jacket, not with its barb, but with a kind of suction cup, a sticky, powerful grip that tugged me backwards. I yelled, clawing at the fabric, my fingers scrabbling, trying to break free. The creature was playing with me, toying with its prey. It didn't want a quick kill. It wanted to savor the fear. I ripped myself free with a desperate lunge, the old jacket tearing, leaving a piece of the fabric stuck to the tendril. The creature paused, its tendrils twitching, as if examining its prize. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. I pushed forward, blindly, frantically, the ladder now a distant, shimmering hope in the darkness. The air in the tunnel began to thin, to change. The putrid smell was still there, but now mixed with a new, sharper scent. Ozone, stronger than before, like an impending electrical storm. The constant hum was rising in pitch, becoming a high-frequency whine that drilled into my skull, making my teeth ache, making my ears ring. The creature was close, too close. I could feel its immense presence pressing in behind me, a wave of palpable dread. And then, as I rounded a slight bend in the tunnel, I saw it. The faint, metallic glint of the ladder, miles above, a beacon of hope. But between me and it, the tunnel floor was no longer smooth dirt. It was ripped apart. A massive fissure, jagged and raw, had opened up in the ground, stretching across the entire width of the passage. It pulsed with a sickly green light from within, an almost liquid glow emanating from its depths. It looked like a wound in the earth, freshly torn, and it was too wide to jump. I skidded to a halt at the edge, my heart seizing in my chest. Below, the fissure seemed bottomless, filled with that same unholy green luminescence, a shimmering abyss. And as I stared into it, I saw shapes moving within the green glow. Something long and thin, like tentacles, swaying and coiling in the depths, their forms indistinct but undeniably there. The hum intensified, vibrating through the fissure, and I realized with sickening clarity that this wasn't just a crack in the earth. This was a living, breathing part of the entity, a manifestation of its presence, and it had opened up to block my escape. Behind me, the scraping, thumping sounds of the creature stopped. A heavy, vibrating silence descended, broken only by my ragged breathing and the terrifying whine of the hum. I was trapped. Ahead, an unjumpable chasm filled with a pulsing, alien horror. Behind, the monstrosity that had chased me through the depths. My flashlight, clutched in my trembling hand, illuminated my desperate, futile position. There was no way out. The creature was here. It had me. And the screaming faces on its body seemed to laugh, silently, horribly, at my doomed fate. The silence behind me was more terrifying than any sound. It was the silence of a predator savoring its prey, of a game coming to its inevitable end. My breath hitched in my throat, ragged and shallow, my lungs burning. The fissure before me pulsed, a gaping emerald wound in the earth, its depths writhing with unseen forms. I was caught between an uncrossable chasm and an unthinkable horror. My flashlight beam, feeble and wavering, seemed to spotlight my utter helplessness. This was it. This was where Alex, the urban explorer, the seeker of forgotten histories, became another screaming face absorbed into the dark, chitinous hide of the thing. My mind, in a desperate, last-ditch effort to survive, raced through impossible scenarios. Climb the walls? No handholds, too slick. Jump? Madness. The fissure was too wide, too deep, and those things in the green glow. I didn't want to think about those things. My eyes frantically scanned the ceiling, the floor, anything. Nothing. Just the endless, suffocating darkness, the hum, and the inescapable presence of the creature. And then, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. Not from the creature behind me, but from the fissure itself. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low rumble rising from the depths of the glowing chasm. The green light intensified, flaring violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced like specters across the tunnel walls. The air pressure dropped suddenly, painfully, making my ears pop, like an immense vacuum had just been activated. The creature behind me let out a sound, not a roar, not a shriek, but a deep, resonant thrum that reverberated through the very stone, shaking me to my core. It was a sound of ancient power, of immense, alien satisfaction. It was the sound of its hunger. The air in the tunnel grew impossibly cold, and I could feel its tendrils, not touching me, but sensing me, testing the air around me, 100 invisible probes confirming my position. Suddenly, without warning, the entire tunnel groaned. A terrible, grinding sound, like immense tectonic plates shifting. Dust rained down in torrents, choking the air. The fissure before me widened with an audible crack, jagged edges of earth and rock tearing apart. The green light from within intensified to an unbearable brilliance, forcing me to shield my eyes. The forms within the fissure writhed faster, their serpentine shapes momentarily visible in the blinding light before vanishing again. The creature behind me surged forward, its immense, dark mass filling the tunnel, its tendrils whipping out, 100 barbed ropes reaching for me. I could feel the heat, the pressure of its approach. This was its final lunge. This was the end. Just as its tendrils were about to ensnare me, the grinding sound reached a crescendo, with a deafening roar that ripped through the very fabric of the earth. The tunnel roof directly above the fissure began to collapse. Not just a few rocks, but massive slabs of concrete, tons of earth and twisted rebar plummeting downwards into the glowing abyss. The ground shook violently, throwing me off my feet. I screamed, a raw, animalistic sound, as I fell, instinctively curling into a ball, shielding my head. The collapse was catastrophic. The entire section of the tunnel, including the fissure, was swallowed by a maelstrom of falling debris. The green light vanished, replaced by an eruption of dust and darkness. The roar of falling rock was deafening, a cacophony of destruction that drowned out everything else. I was propelled forward by the shock wave, tumbling over rough ground, my body slamming against unseen obstacles. I landed hard, pain blossoming across my ribs and head, but I was still on solid ground. Gasping, spitting dust, I scrambled backwards, away from the yawning, collapsing maw. The creature. Where was the creature? Through the settling dust, in the intermittent beam of my miraculously still working flashlight, I saw it. The colossal monster was thrashing, half submerged in the newly formed pit, immense chunks of rock crushing its chitinous plates. Its tendrils whipped wildly, tearing at the falling debris, its glowing head mass pulsing erratically, flickering with an agonizing, dying light. It was trapped, pinioned. The collapse had caught it. It let out another sound, a high-pitched, chitinous screech, a sound of pure agony and rage, unlike anything I had heard before. The sound was so piercing, so utterly alien, that it sliced through the ringing in my ears, making my teeth ache. Its immense power, once so terrifying, was now being turned against itself, its struggles only bringing down more of the unstable tunnel. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I didn't question my luck. My mind was a primal, screaming blur of adrenaline and survival instinct. The ladder. Get to the ladder. Now. I scrambled over the rubble, bypassing the newly created sinkhole where the creature thrashed, its dying screams echoing in the collapsing tunnel. My injured ankle screamed in protest, but I ignored it, pushing through the searing pain. The tunnel behind me was a mess of fallen rock, twisted metal, and fresh, cold air now rushing in from somewhere above, indicating a massive breach in the surface. This was a direct consequence of the collapse, another open loop that I understood only too well. If this thing had torn the earth apart, what was happening above ground? My flashlight beam found the ladder glinting through the swirling dust. It was still there, a lifeline to the world above. I reached it, my hands raw and trembling, and started to climb. Each rung was an agony, my muscles screaming, my lungs burning, the putrid air now mixed with the acrid stench of dust and pulverized rock. Below me, the creature's thrashing grew weaker, its screams fading into a guttural moan, finally silenced by the crushing weight of the earth. Or so I hoped. I clawed my way up, desperate, driven by the absolute certainty that if I stopped, even for a second, something would reach out from the depths and drag me back down. The ascent was a blur of pain and exertion. I don't know how long it took. It felt like hours, an eternity of dark, cold metal, and the lingering fear that the whole shaft would give way. Finally, miraculously, my head broke free into the cool, fresh night air. I gasped, coughing, inhaling the sweet, clean scent of the outside world, a stark contrast to the subterranean rot. I pulled myself out of the hatch, collapsing onto the overgrown concrete, my body shaking uncontrollably. I lay there for a long time, sprawled on the cold ground, staring up at the bruised, starless sky, the taste of rust and fear still in my mouth. My entire body ached, my clothes were torn, and my mind felt utterly shattered. The hatch. I had to close it. I crawled over, mustering every last ounce of strength, and yanked the heavy steel lid shut. The ancient hinges groaned in protest, but it closed with a dull, heavy thud. I fumbled for the bolt cutters, my hands shaking too violently to use them, but I managed to jam a piece of rebar through the old padlock hasp, a futile gesture, but one that gave me a sliver of psychological comfort. I stumbled away from the hatch, limping and dazed, back towards my car. My phone, forgotten in my pocket, vibrated. It was late, or early. I had no idea. The world above seemed impossibly bright, impossibly normal. But nothing was normal. Not anymore. I had seen it. I had touched the horror that lay hidden beneath our city. And it had touched me. My research had given me the answers I sought, but they were answers I could never unlearn. The lost line wasn't just abandoned, it was a prison, a containment, and in my foolish quest for discovery, I had almost freed the prisoner. The city had tried to forget, to pave over the nightmare, not because it was a failed project, but because it was a successful, desperate attempt to bury an unspeakable evil. And now, the earth had opened up, again. I made it home, somehow. The drive was a blur. I've been sitting here ever since, trying to make sense of it, trying to write it all down before my mind fabricates a comfortable lie. But the truth is too vivid, too terrifying. I can still hear the thumps, the scrapes, the alien screams. I can still see those screaming faces fused into stone, fused into the creature itself. They are etched into my nightmares now, a permanent part of my psyche. The city isn't just a collection of buildings and streets anymore. It's a thin skin stretched over an abyss, a slumbering beast. And I woke it. I keep looking at the news, checking for reports of seismic activity, sinkholes, anything that might confirm the colossal collapse I witnessed. So far, nothing. The city sleeps on, oblivious, but I know what's down there, and I know it's still alive, because even now, hours later, as I sit here trying to tell you this story, I can still feel it. That low, deep hum. It's not in the ground. It's in my head. A persistent, vibrating resonance that won't go away. And the question gnaws at me. What if the collapse didn't kill it? What if it merely contained it for now? What if the new breach, the one that let the fresh air into the tunnel, provided a new way out? I'm terrified of what might emerge. Terrified of what I've unleashed. I'm telling you this because I don't know who else to tell. No one would believe me. They'd say I was crazy, that it was a hallucination, an overactive imagination. But you, my community, you understand the dark corners, the hidden truths. You've heard stories like mine before. So, I need your help. What do I do? How do I warn people about something they refuse to believe exists? What if the hum grows louder? What if the ground begins to tremble, not from a subway, but from something far, far worse? Have any of you heard whispers of strange disappearances near the old industrial district? Any odd tremors late at night? Please, share your thoughts. Share your theories. I feel like I'm screaming into the void. But maybe, just maybe, one of you has encountered something similar, or knows a way to fight back against a nightmare that just became chillingly real. This isn't just my story anymore. It's our city's secret, and I fear its impending doom. I wish to God I had never found that hidden station, because now the station has found me, and it's not letting go.